They were targeted for what they were born with. Between 2006 and 2015, people with albinism in Tanzania were hunted in a wave of killings driven by belief and exploitation. Dozens were killed. Others survived, but were left with permanent scars. Children disappeared from their homes. In some cases, even graves were disturbed. Families lived with a fear that was almost impossible to describe. At first, the violence seemed isolated, tragic but isolated. An attack here, a disappearance there. But as the months passed, something became clear. It was a pattern. The victims were being deliberately targeted, driven by a dangerous belief that certain body parts could bring wealth or protection. To understand how this happened, we first need to understand who was being targeted and why. This is not the story of a country. It is the story of vulnerable individuals who were hunted and of the investigations and fight for justice that followed. The belief that fueled these attacks did not appear overnight. It grew from myths, misinformation, and a deep misunderstanding of albinism. Albinism is a genetic condition that affects the body's ability to produce melanin, the pigment responsible for the color of the skin, hair, and eyes. It occurs in every part of the world. Because melanin helps protect the skin and supports vision, people with albinism are often more vulnerable to sun damage and visual impairment. But the condition does not affect intelligence. It does not affect character. And it does not determine a person's worth. In Tanzania, albinism occurs at a higher rate than in many other regions. For years, those born with the condition faced stigma and discrimination. Derogatory language was common. Access to education and employment was often limited. For many families, this prejudice was painful, but survivable. Then, in the mid-2000s, something shifted. Discrimination escalated into violence. That violence was not random. It was driven by belief. According to United Nations reports, the wave of killings was linked to harmful myths rooted in witchcraft beliefs. Investigators documented claims that certain body parts could bring wealth, power, or protection. Human Rights Watch reported that in some regions, limbs, hair, and other parts were believed to be used in charms or potions by certain traditional practitioners. It is important to be clear. These beliefs are not supported by evidence. They are myths, and the United Nations has explicitly described them as such. But the consequences were real. Police investigations and human rights groups reported that attacks were sometimes commissioned. Perpetrators were allegedly paid large sums of money. Reuters later reported that buyers were allegedly prepared to pay tens of thousands of US dollars. Yet, the identities of those alleged buyers rarely surfaced in court. Much of what is publicly known comes from police statements and activist reporting. The broader criminal networks were never fully mapped in court. Some traditional healers were arrested and prosecuted. Others were accused. But the individuals who financed or commissioned the attacks largely remained in the shadows. While investigations struggled to map the networks, the violence continued. As the myths spread, the violence intensified. By the late 2000s, the violence could no longer be described as isolated. Human rights organizations and international observers were documenting a sustained pattern of attacks. Reports were emerging across multiple regions. Over several years, at least 75 people with albinism were killed. Different organizations cite slightly different figures, some reporting 75, others 76, some closer to 80. Many more survived and were left permanently mutilated. The victims were not confined to one age group. Young children were taken, teenagers were attacked, adults were killed, both men and women were targeted. Human Rights Watch noted that children were particularly vulnerable, often because they were easier to abduct. The assaults were described as deliberate and brutal. United Nations and non-governmental reports documented repeated cases involving dismemberment. Those findings were later summarized by National Geographic. In some instances, even burial did not guarantee safety. Graves were opened, remains were disturbed. The violence was most frequently reported in the northwestern Lake Zone regions, including Mwanza, Shinyanga, and Geita, though cases were documented elsewhere as well. From the late 2000s into the mid-2010s, Tanzanian authorities, international media, and United Nations bodies repeatedly raised alarm. The United Nations later described the period as a spat of brutal attacks and killings. Despite the scale of violence, successful prosecutions were limited. By early 2015, Reuters reported that only 5 murder cases involving victims with albinism had resulted in convictions since 2000. Only 5 in more than a decade. That same year, authorities brought charges in a case that had remained unresolved for 6 years: the killing of a woman with albinism in the Geita region. Soon after, in what was widely described as a landmark ruling, a Tanzanian court sentenced 4 people to death for the 2013 murder of a woman in the Mwanza region. Among those convicted was her husband. Court records detailed that her arm and leg had been severed. The judge stated that the sentence reflected the seriousness and the growing pattern of such crimes. In the years that followed, additional cases moved through the legal system. Tanzanian officials later stated that nearly 20 individuals were facing the death penalty in connection with killings of people with albinism. For many families, those rulings marked a rare moment of accountability. But accountability did not erase what had already happened. Between 2006 and 2015, at least 75 people with albinism were killed in Tanzania. Many more survived, but carried permanent scars. The violence was driven by myth, false beliefs that body parts could bring wealth or power. Some perpetrators were arrested and sentenced. Others were detained during nationwide crackdowns. But not every case was solved, and not every question was answered. Over time, new measures were introduced, legal rulings followed, awareness grew. Yet, for many families, the loss is permanent. This is not a story with a simple ending. It is a story of lives permanently altered, of accountability pursued, and of a crisis that forced a nation and the international community to confront belief, protection, and dignity. And that story is still unfolding. Behind every statistic in this case were real people and real loss. If you have thoughts on the details or the outcome, share them in the comments. Subscribe for full case breakdowns that go beyond the headlines. Until the next case, follow the cadence.